Thank you. Hello. Do you want to tune or just ring it?
We'll do that before we...
Okay, before you do the whole thing. Okay, good. Hello, I'm Adolphe, and what you're going to see now is a bit strange. It's not really a concert. It's not exactly a lecture. It's a demonstration of an idea with music. And the question that I'm going to address here is, why does what we call sonata form, if you don't know what that is, just hold on. Why does sonata form endure for so many, actually centuries? It's a very strong structure in music. And I'll tell you this, the first movement of every piece, with very few exceptions, but a few, of Beethoven, Mozart, Haydn, and quite a few other composers, most of Brahms, a lot of Mahler, many other composers, it's in what is called sonata form, the first movement. And we have sonatas, and sonatas are in this form. But actually, it's not really a form. Uh-oh. In fact, if you say the word, it tells you the truth. It is so not a form. I made that up. Okay. Now, what is it? It's a procedure. And what I'm going to show you today, and I'm going to prove beyond the shadow of a doubt, that it is the same as courtroom procedure. That's what we're going to look at. So we're using a piece by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, his quartet in G minor for these instruments here. Yes. And they're going to play, and I'll keep stopping them and showing you how this piece is exactly like a courtroom drama, where the state has accused someone of murder, and you have, those of you who have never watched a courtroom drama, I think there might be one person here. Or two, maybe. Yeah, okay. Who have never seen a courtroom drama or doesn't know what a courtroom, I can't really help you with what a court is. But you will have two lawyers, a prosecutor and a defense attorney, and there will be witnesses, and there will be a verdict at the end, and all the things that go on in a courtroom drama. You will see, this is really what this music is. So let's start right at the beginning and hear the opening of the piece, let's say for about 8 bars. Okay, so what you have right away is all the instruments, not the piano, but the 3 strings, violin, viola, and cello, in unison, stating the accusation. And then the piano as the defendant. Now the defendant is the person who's been accused of the crime, saying, I didn't do it. I'm going to ask you to play it again. I'm going to sing, which will only happen briefly once. So don't worry. I'm going to sing words that help explain what's going on. Ready? You are the murderer. I was not there. I didn't do anything wrong, I swear it. I am innocent. You are the murderer. I was not there. I didn't do anything wrong, I swear it. I am innocent. Okay, now I'm not going to do any more of that. But I'm just dramatizing for you in the worst and best possible way, vocally in the worst possible way, that you have an accusation in unison, which is the state together, accusing, in this case, at the moment, the piano, and the piano is defendant. Now, the roles of the piano and the strings mix up. It's not that they are always the state, and this is the defendant. They all take turns doing different things, as you'll see. But in the beginning, it's pretty clear. Now, I'm going to ask you to start again, but it's very important that you know that this is in the key of G minor, that it's minor. In order to drill that into you, I mean, it won't be painful, but just to make the point, if you could play just that opening phrase with E natural, well, this is what it would sound like in G major. You see now, we can stop right there. That doesn't sound like something's wrong, does it? Now play it the right way again, please. You see, that half step, it's called a half step. If you don't know what half step is, you do now. It's also a minor second. That doesn't mean, I know this is a court trial, doesn't mean that it doesn't have any legal rights. It's a minor. But it is a minor second. It is the most important thing in this whole structure. The minor second, that little second, is the motif. It's part of the motif, or what we would actually call in this case the murder motif. If you take it away, We don't have the murder. But keep those two notes in your mind, D and E flat. The E flat falls down on the D, because it will appear again and again and again. And the prosecution's case is going to hinge on those two notes. All right. Now, if we can start again from the beginning, but this time let's go all the way up to 16. I might sing, I might not. We'll see. Okay. You are the bird. I'll tell you why. Because you know, there are pianists all over the country who run when I go to because that what you just heard is the high D and then the D and the E flat are the highest notes of the phrase. Those are these notes. Now, can we all sing a D and an E flat? Here's the E flat. Okay, you be listening for that. So we have, and then, bum, 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 the D. Okay, now what if you were the defense attorney, and that's what you just heard. The prosecution is making the accusation, the charge, and it's your turn to say something. What you should do probably is try to, well, you know what? I'm not going to tell you what you should try to do. I want you to listen to a short bit of music, and let's see if we can figure out what the defense tries. Let's hear, starting right after that, you know, the like 6 bars. 6 bars, yeah. Okay, what's happening here, and then you'll hear it again, is the defense is saying it is not fair to my client to have this case tried in G minor. Because in G minor, everything sounds guilty. And there's the E flats and B flats all over the place. If we just go to a different venue, like let's say B flat major, everything will be fine. So in this first phrase, can we just hear the strings play that first 2 bars that we started at? The tune is the same in the violin, right? But the chords are suggesting that we maybe go somewhere else. Then there's an objection from the prosecuting attorney in the case, overruled by the judge. And that has not only the feeling of those 3 things, but it has accomplished what musicians call a modulation. In other words, it has changed key. And we are now in B flat major. So, what happens is the tune is now presented, the melody, the motif or the murder motive is now presented in B flat major by the defense. It's quite different. Let's hear a little bit of that, starting right there at bar 23. I'll stop you. Okay, now let's take that apart, as you would if you were in a court of law. First of all, oh good, you're not running, you're just... The piano, instead of playing, has turned it into this. Sounds innocent now, doesn't it? I mean, literally, innocent. It's completely innocent. Because there's no half step. It's not there. And the E flat to D happens to be in the violin, but it doesn't sound the same in this key. But I want you to listen to the viola. We're going to hear this again. You're going to hear the violin, da, 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 the E flat D, but the viola is actually a little worried about this situation. So let's hear that section again. The piano is the defense attorney. The viola, let's say, is sitting in the jury box and is not convinced at all. Did you hear that? Okay, hold it. Can you play those two notes again? The G flat, E flat. Okay. Now, if you put a B flat in front of that, what do you get? Put a B flat up and up. There it is again. So there's a B flat everywhere, especially the piano is playing them in the bass over and over. And he thinks, wait a minute, I think this is not true. I think that the prosecution is right. Can you play that whole passage, but play a G natural in the viola, and you will hear the sense that maybe the prosecution is right disappears, and it's all innocence. You see how one note makes a difference? And every note is like that. Every note makes a difference, but I'm drawing your attention to the serious ones. That G flat is a reference to the opening theme, the murder motif with that half step. That G flat would put the theme in B flat minor. Nobody else is doing that. That's kind of strange. Why did Mozart have one note in B flat minor and the rest in B flat major? Because he's telling a story. And the story is about what I'm telling you, the guilt or innocence of this motif. Okay. All right, now let's proceed. What you're going to hear now is the prosecuting attorney and the defense attorney approach the bench, which will just sound like approaching music. And then they have a little argument. Let's play this again at 23 and go all the way to, let's go all the way to 42, 43, 44, the downbeat of 45. She's going to do something in a second. Now, when I was doing the arguments, it is clear which one is the prosecutor and which one is the defense by the notes they play. The violin, let's hear the violin notes. Right there. The violin is playing a B flat and an A. Yes, it's a half step, but it's insisting on the key of B flat. The viola is playing the guilty notes, E flat and D. You see, they're actually representing the key of B flat and an attempt to remind you of the E flat D. It's quite remarkable. Then, we stopped right at a passage where the piano, let's go right to where we stopped. The piano has this for 4 bars or so. Okay, the piano is playing exactly the same thing that the violin and the viola play, right? Did you get that? Let's hear just the piano for a moment. Sing. Okay, so if we just heard this in the violins, why is the piano playing that? What does that represent? Joe, it's the court stenographer. By the way, if you think I only know him, I know all of you. So I may call on you at any given moment. Okay, so anyway, the court stenographer is repeating the passage. Now, we eventually will come to the end of this little section of music, and something new is going to happen. But let's get to the end. Let's go from where the court stenographer begins, which is 45, and end on the downbeat of 54, 55, 56, downbeat of 57. Aside from which I pointed out to E flat D, we don't have to go I won't mention every one of those, but they're everywhere. The question is, every time he writes E flat D, is that a reference to this? Not every time, but they're often very obvious ones. For example, the piano plays an arpeggio. Play it the way it's written, please. Okay, the highest note is E flat, and the lowest note before it resolves is another E flat and a D. Let's hear that one more time, the way it's written. Now, does that mean he's drawing attention to the E flat and D? Yes, because he could have written it many, many other ways. We worked out 50 or 60, but let's hear one. Right, this is exactly the same thing. In other words, the same two harmonies with an arpeggio. But why is it positioned so that the E flat is there and the E flat is there? It's actually slightly awkward, isn't it? And it's a little bit strange, but it's there to draw attention again to those notes. You better believe me or I'll say it again. Now, the next phrase, isn't that what you do in court? You better believe me or I'll say it again? I think that's actually how it works. Okay, now, by the way, I have been on jury duty many, 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 many times, which is how I got this idea. I know we have some ex-New Yorkers here, and I have to say that in New York, they don't say defendant. They say defendant. And it drives me crazy. They say the defendant. Anyway. But I have also been on 2 trials with homicide detectives. I actually have. And that is going to figure into this pretty soon, because I have to tell you what that's like. Okay, now, we then get, the defense decides to present what they would call, secretly amongst themselves, an alibi. But the idea is, they're going to tell their story. It seems to have nothing to do with what the prosecution is saying, because they're saying he wasn't in G minor. It's not even the same tune. Everything is different. And this is what the defense presents as their version of the story, starting right where we stopped. Okay, that's good. So, what does that have to do with what we've been hearing so far? Nothing? Something? Well, I will tell you that the original motif, the theme, is hidden in there by Mozart. It's not obvious. The rhythm is hidden in there of the opening accusation. Did you catch it? Okay, listen to it again and see if you can hear dee da da dee da da hidden in this theme. Mozart writes a sforzando there. In fact, I'm going to have to do something at the piano. Excuse me. If you are not a musician, you might not know what a sforzando is, but now you will. It's really a good thing to know. It comes up in conversation all the time. S stands for subito, which means suddenly, and F stands for forte, and forzando means subito forzando, or subito forte means suddenly loud. So everything's, whatever it is, soft or loud, suddenly louder is what it means. And Mozart did not write very many. In all of his music, and there's a lot of music, there are very few actually written out sforzandi. Whereas Beethoven, to compare him, every piece, once he gets past a certain point, they're all over the place, and they're really important. So with Mozart, you have to figure if he writes one in, there has to be a very strong reason. Now it's 1, 2, 3, 4 is the rhythm. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. See that he has to write this sforzando here because it's on 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. All the accents are in the wrong place. They're not falling in the natural place. Therefore, he has to write them in order. Why does he write them in? For 2 reasons. One, he has buried the rhythm inside another rhythm. And 2, he wants you to notice it. So he puts a sforzando there. He wants it to be played. Otherwise, it would sound like this. So 1, 2. See, I mean, you wouldn't go. Then it would be even more hidden. It would be so hidden you'd probably never think of it. Now, I hope you like that because it's very interesting. And if that kind of thing appeals to you a lot, you should either be a lawyer or a musician. Okay, now, we've got that. Then comes another theme. Let's move on to the next theme. This sounds so innocent. If that wasn't innocent enough, but of course, when it's presented by the defense, we hear it as innocent, but we don't know about the theme being hidden there. I'm telling you about it because it saves some time in the courtroom. But it's actually hidden. Now comes another theme which sounds completely innocent. Okay, that's the theme. What does that have to do with anything? Well, it sounds completely innocent. And only later in the piece, in the cross-examination, when this is put in G minor, will we hear why it's incriminating. So I'm going to make you wait, and we'll get back to it. Okay, now, there are a lot of E flats and Ds. I won't draw your attention to all of them. You have to trust me. I want to get to what in music is called the development section, which is a very boring expression. Don't you think? The development section. And if you know music really well, you know that it isn't even true that sometimes in a development, nothing's developed. It's taken apart. It's not put together. It doesn't grow. It's reorganized. Or it's just reduced. Or something brand new comes in. How is that a development? But not only that, most composers are developing in the exposition. So in other words, they're starting right from the beginning. So it's not a great term. We're stuck with it. But in a courtroom trial at this point, it makes much more sense if you listen to these things as evidence. And in this case, there's new evidence presented. It's a new theme presented by the defense. And we're going to listen carefully with an expert witness who's going to come in and explain how, again, inside this music, there is the murder motif, or the murder motive. Okay, can we hear starting at 104? Everybody, first piano, and everybody come in. Okay, never mind. I want to do this first. I forgot. I'm going to spend about an hour on this before I go on. No, kidding. Okay. Now, you just heard something in the piano. It sounds like a new theme. It's not clear what it's doing there, perhaps. And I've decided to call in a homicide detective to discuss the hominy. That's a joke. Homicide, hominy. Okay. This is why I have my hat. Okay. Now, if you've ever been in a courtroom with a homicide detective, as I have, you will understand not what I'm saying, but the idea. Your Honor, as I'm going to use a New York accent. Your Honor, I have taken the liberty of preparing a statement concerning the evidence. It is written in professional, detecto-musical jargonoidal parlance, so you'll forgive me if it's incomprehensible. The intervallic stratigraphy, connoting the intrachromatic self-reference of the thematic dispositional regrouping, Your Honor, places the motivic fragment in question in a subtextual condition in the homophonic fabric, which in fact becomes evident by the oral vocalization of an isolated linear component. In other words, if I sing the tune for you, you're just going to hear it. Okay, now, then what happens is, I'm going to ask, you can bear with me, maybe I'll do it as the homicide detective. He's going to sing what is partly the melodic line and partly hidden in the bass line, and you will hear that the tune is actually there. Why don't you give me 2 bars before so I can ease into it. Did you get that? Not everybody nodded. So, and I could see everybody. So, what I sang was just, you have to move, was just this. Right, which is, it's the theme again. It is actually in slow motion, hiding in that passage. Somebody's probably thinking, did Mozart know he did that? Anybody thinking that? I have two answers for that, actually 5, but 2. One is, what do you mean by no? Do you think Mozart did anything that he didn't know he did? That's one answer. In other words, do you mean, did he know it in English? No. Did he know it in music language? Yes. Did he know that it was there by ear? Of course. Did he do it on purpose? It depends whether you mean on purpose that he took the time to think about it, because he wrote, an incredible amount of music, died at age 35. Did he take the time to analyze it? I don't think he needed to, because this is composition, not analysis. So he knew it was there. It was the whole reason, I think, for the passage. So yes, he knew it was there. And secondly, if I find something there, the chances are that Mozart knew it was there are very high. Because I'm just looking at it a couple of hundred years later, looking for stuff. He wrote it, so I think yes. Okay, now, getting back to this, but that's when you go back to what does it mean to know, because sometimes you discover something, that's right, okay. Now, also, aside from having the tune buried in there, where did it go? Ah, yes. Aside from having the tune buried here, you have this melody. It starts like, right? But instead it drops. And the range of this is a very weird range for music of that time. The outside interval, in other words, that's the outside line. What is that? If you put it together, it's the half step. Are you getting this? Yes. Good, okay. Now, then he goes up. It's the same thing going up that he did going down. It's the half step again. If I were to go... These are octave displacements. Remember, this is the defense, trying to hide things. So the tune is hidden in slow motion inside the harmony, and that interval, instead of being close, is spread apart to distract you. But it's all there. And in fact, it accounts for why it's there. And Mozart makes it very clear that he knew what he was doing, because in the next section, you take that run of the note up to that half step above. We call it a minor ninth, because, well, if you can do the math, it's actually very easy. You go 7, if you have a second, it inverts to a ninth. You can figure that out with your iPhone. Anyway. But basically, Mozart proves that he knows what he's doing here, because that motif is now, in a sense, passed around the jury box. Everybody looks at the evidence, and they pass it from one to the next, like a photograph. That scale is passed around like a photograph. Everyone gets a look at it, and you hear the music getting more and more tense as each person in the jury box looks at it and realizes, hey, wait a minute. He's guilty. He's got to be guilty. They all see it clearly. They see that half step, they see it, and they pass it around, and by the end of the section where they passed it around, it's sounding pretty bad for the defendant. Okay, so let's hear starting everything that we just did, starting with the tune, but going all the way to the downbeat of 141. points. It is time for the cross-examination, and the prosecution is starting all over again. But the defendant is still proclaiming innocence in exactly the same way. And so what happens is it sounds like the opening of the piece, because the prosecution starts again with the charge. The piano, as the defendant, is responding, but then it doesn't continue like it did before, because the prosecution says, this is remaining in G minor. I'm going to continue to look at everything that was said in G minor. No more B flat. You're going to hear the struggle to keep in G minor, which I'll point out to you. And then we're going to hear all the music that you heard in B flat in G minor. Why do composers do that? That's part of what's called sonata form. You go back to the original key, but everything stays that way. Because when you hear things in the original key, they are different. And this, to prove it, you will hear that these themes are much more guilty and more obviously making the case for the prosecution than they were in B flat. So let's hear, starting at the beginning, where we just stopped with the cross-examination, and then maintaining G minor. Now the attempt to stay in G minor. The defense is trying to raise some reasonable doubt here, but it's not working. We are back in G minor. Go ahead. The original argument in G minor. Chord stenographer's back. Okay, now, I'm stopping for a second. We're going to hear that famous second theme. It's what it's called in music. Now, back to music terminology. Second theme. Isn't that a great concept? It's the stupidest thing. First theme, second theme. I mean, isn't that obvious? What else would you call it? The third theme when it comes second? Is it analysis to say this is the first theme when it comes first? How is that analysis? That's counting. So I can't stand that kind of thing. You know, you say, oh, I know all about sonata form. You get your first theme, and you got your second theme. Anyway, so then they develop, you know, then they come back. It's just totally ridiculous. You don't learn anything from that. However, it is good for multiple choice and standardized tests on music theory. Now, what happens next is we get that theme in which the rhythm, dee, dum, ba, beep, ba, bum, is hidden inside. But this time, it's not, the rhythm is the same, but it's not only the rhythm, because we have moved to G minor. Let's hear what it sounds like in G minor. That so-called second theme. Yeah, okay, that's fine. You don't need to do it twice. Now, let me point out what's different. You still heard the rhythm, right? You are the murderer. But the difference is, with the transposition, the top note is the E flat and the D. The guilty notes are the outline of the tune now. Is that exciting? I think it's exciting. Look, if you're trying to prove someone murdered someone, these things matter. And basically, it was the rhythm alone before, and now it's the rhythm and the pitches. What more do you want? Okay, now, then comes that little innocent theme. Can we hear the theme in its original innocence, which is like bar 74? Let's just do the piano. This is the theme as we heard it back, as shown by the defense in B flat major. Okay, now, when it comes back in G minor, when everything is in G minor, listen what it does. Okay, did you catch that? Instead of being here, where it sounds innocent, it's back on the original. It's, again, the same thing, but it was disguised in another key. Now, We've made a very good case. There's not much left. But how many of you know who Perry Mason is? Okay, if you don't know Perry Mason, you can probably find it on YouTube. Before LA Law, before whatever courtroom dramas you may know of, I mean on television, the original courtroom drama was called Perry Mason. And Perry Mason, in his cases, every single case ended with a huge, wild confession. He would be saying, isn't it true? And that this, and isn't it true? And then they would go, I did it! Now, of course, that's very effective once in a while. Every single week they did that. So it was kind of humorous, and people made fun of it all the time. And then they stopped doing it. But there's a confession in this piece. I'm not going to tell you where it is. It's so obvious. Let's hear it. This is the very end where the judge is charging the jury to go out and come to a decision, a verdict. He sends them out. But when he makes the charge, the piano, as the defendant, is still saying, I didn't do it, please, I didn't do it. But then the piano says, well, I did do it, actually. And it says it in a hysterical way. And I think you will hear how it happens. So we're starting at 224, I think it is. Whatever it says, I can't read it. Did you get that? Okay. Could you please play the opening the way it's composed, the opening of the piece, and then we'll come back. I want you to listen to everything that's different. Mostly it's the confession, but there's something else too. Okay, now let's hear it at the end of the piece. The differences are only two little differences, but they're enormous. Okay? Right? That leap, and you know what note that is? Take a wild guess. E flat. Right. I know some of you are not guessing. But it's the E flat. And then the E flat, and then it comes cascading down, and at that point the jury is excused, and they come back with a verdict. Let's do that. Oh, but there is another difference, which is incredibly subtle. You know what it is, Ethan?
It's the trill on the first.
Well, it happens when the trill happens, but it's not the trill.
Is it an extra note in there?
It's not an extra note. You're both getting really close. Okay, I'll show you what it is. That was good listening. Oh my lord, that they zeroed in on that. Of course, I probably made a face there. But the first time it's with a D. The second time it's an E flat. Listen, isn't that amazing? The first time it's this chord with a D. The second time there's no D, there's an E flat. That is an incredibly tiny difference. Did Mozart do that on purpose? Of course. He is obsessed with the D and the E flat because it is the drama of the piece. And that E flat that's in the piano also comes flying up to the top note there and is basically a confession. It's saying, I give up. Or it's obvious that I did it. So let's do from where we just did it to the end. I will talk over it a little bit. And then we're going to hear the whole piece after you have a moment for a question. Okay, the judge charges the jury. to say I'm innocent anymore. Okay, before you hear the entire movement straight through, anybody have a question about this, or a challenge, or a rebuttal, or cross-examination? Naomi? Now that's an interesting question. What do I think Mozart pictured as the story? My belief is that Mozart pictures stories in music, not in pictures. He's a music picturer, okay? So for him, the story exists in music. Now, let's say, I mean, that's a very good question. Let's say you have a book, a children's book, full of drawings and pictures. It might say, let me just do something at the keyboard, sorry. It might say, once there was a little girl, and then you hear this. And you have a picture of the little girl. What if it says, once there was a little girl, and you have a picture of a sad little girl? What if it says, once there was a little girl, and you have a picture of a nasty little girl? The picture can do a lot, right? The same is true in music. The little girl. Or the little girl. Or the little girl. I mean, who knows? But basically, it is exactly the same thing, that instead of pictures, it's music. So that's the story. Another question? That was very interesting. Yes?
Do you have anything to say about the role of the cello?
The role of the cello. Well, the cello has a lot less to say in this piece than the violin and the viola. That is true. There's not a great reason, but the cello does have some key moments. It does have a lot of E-flat Ds back and forth, and it does have a very important spot when the scale is being passed around. Yeah, just play that. Yeah, the first time it goes D to E flat, that dramatic moment, that happens at an extremely important spot, and it starts in the cello. In Mozart's day, I mean, Mozart didn't write any cello solos. The first real solo cello pieces with keyboard are by Beethoven. So it was slowly being liberated in this kind of form into an instrument that had more equal say with higher instruments. But of course, in the string quartets, the cello becomes totally liberated. This form did not exist until Mozart. It was the first, violin, viola, cello, and piano. Nobody wrote any of those before Mozart. So in a way, it's like perhaps it was a mini piano concerto. He was commissioned to write three piano quartets. And the way they used to do that was he would get paid a very little bit of money, and then the publisher would put out these things on subscription. And there would be maybe a concert, maybe not, but people would buy copies of the score on subscription. And if not enough people ordered copies of the score in advance, they wouldn't publish it. So it's interesting. It's sort of like, cable television, something like that. So basically, Mozart's publisher agreed to 3 piano quartets. The first one, the one in G minor, was this. That's the first movement. There are 2 more movements. People didn't like it that much because it was kind of dark and weird. They thought it was scary or strange. They didn't like it that much, and it was hard for the amateurs to play. So the publisher canceled. And they published this, but he wouldn't publish the second one, which Mozart wrote anyway. So we have a great one in E-flat major. He wrote it anyway, but he never wrote the third because that was too much without any payment. There's a story for you. Just don't trust Mozart. Okay, are we ready to hear the entire... Oh, Elliot, yes.
What can we extract as the general sonata form?
Okay. The general sonata form, first I'll tell you what is typically, if you look up sonata form on your phone, this is what it will give you. It'll say that it comes in 3 big sections: the exposition, the development, and the recapitulation. And the exposition is where the material is first exposed. It has to start somewhere. And you usually get 2 groups of ideas in 2 different keys. Although sometimes it's all in one key, like in Haydn. That changed into 2 groups. There might be 1 theme, and then the same theme in another key. There might be 2 themes, there might be 5 themes, there might be 4 little fragments of themes, you never know. Then, in the so-called development, either it is developed, or it is taken apart, or something new is added. Any kind of technique, anything can happen there. And then, in the recapitulation, all the music of the exposition comes back with several changes. The major change is that it all stays in one key, the original key. There's often a coda, there might be something special and new, and the new things usually come in transitional moments. So while that's basically true, it doesn't illuminate why sonata form works or what's good about it. So what you get from looking at it from a courtroom procedure is, number one, it is not really a form, it's a procedure. It allows the same thing that courtroom procedure allows, which is an infinite variety of arguments with the attempt at getting at truth. That's what a courtroom procedure. Now, a courtroom procedure, or at least a resolution, and courtroom procedure has two sides, and either a judge or a judge and a jury. In a piece of music like this, you have, and in any sonata, you basically have two keys. There are many other keys that get looked at and discussed as evidence or as problematic, but there are two primary keys. And then one key, the original, is the one where you end up. All the ideas can be looked at as either the original idea or a spin on that idea or a development of that idea or a deconstruction of that idea. It all has to do with, in a way, evidence, spinning the evidence, challenging the evidence, undermining the evidence, or proving the evidence, basically, if you think of it that way. Then, in the end, there is a resolution. And there might even be a coda, which could be, depending on the piece, it could be going to jail, or it could be a party. It's hard to say. Okay. So I think the difference is that the way sonata form is usually discussed is devoid of emotional content, and it's devoid of motivation, and it's devoid of, and it's basically wrong in that it's so simplified that you don't get enough information for the procedure. It's like saying a courtroom drama, let's say courtroom procedure was ideas presented, they are explored, and there's a resolution. That's okay, but there's so much more that we know. And we know a lot about it, and we know why. And we know that it's charged with drama, charged with argument, and sonata is too. In fact, one of the things that this courtroom metaphor does help explain is that sonata structures in all of classical music are about subversive activity, musically speaking. The whole idea is to subvert the form, to interrupt each other, to change keys suddenly, to bring in a new idea which disguises something else. It's very secretive and subversive. It is not soothing and simple and clear. It is dramatic, it is disruptive, and it finally is pulled together. That's why there are so many successful works. All the great symphonies start with this so-called procedure, because the procedure is a narrative that has an infinite variety of possibilities that are just charged with emotion. Okay, shall we hear it? First movement. Now there are two other movements, but I'm not going to do those. Okay, are you ready? You sure? Okay. I think you probably are by now.